Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Beneath the Surface. Today we'll be asking, has feminism gone too far? Joining us on the show is Baroness Jenny-Tonge, who is a former Liberal Democrat Member of Parliament. Thank you very much for joining us. Many bloggers, female bloggers, actually are stating that feminism has gone too far. Do you agree?
I'm not sure what you mean because I don't inhabit the blogosphere. So you'll have to explain to me exactly what you mean by going too far.
Meaning that, for example, if a female wants to, have the family life, which is, to get married, make a family, etc., they would either be putting their work on hold or their studies on hold. And if they wanted to continue their studies and developing themselves in the work sphere, they're going to then have to put the family aspect on hold as well. So in that sense, how can the female balance that? And has feminism pushed?
Yeah, has feminism pushed? I mean, feminism has tried very, very hard to make sure that women have equal opportunity. Mm-hmm. Now, I always worry about this equality thing. You can't actually make people equal, whether they're black or white, or young or old, or male or female. We can't be equal, but we can be given equal opportunity to make the most of our lives. Okay? Mm-hmm. And that, for me, is the first principle. Now, the problem arises for women in that, you know that I'm a doctor, I was a doctor in women's health, so I'll talk in medical language. The problem for women is that we have the ovaries that produce the eggs, we have the uterus that nurtures the baby until it's mature enough to be born and to become another human being. We can't get away from that.
Of course.
We've got as far as IVF, but we haven't got as far as a woman saying, here is my tiny little fetus that my husband and I have just created. Will you take it over now and give it back to me when it's 5 years old and can go to school? We don't.
I doubt it will ever come to that stage.
Nobody could possibly dream of that. Now, I can remember I was given equal opportunity. I decided to study medicine. I was also interested in politics. I had a charmed educational existence from a father who believed that women's education was, if anything, more important than the education of his sons, that I had to get going because he knew that in the future I would want to have babies. And so the more I could pack in before I had babies, the better. So I did that, and I got to the point where I'd qualified and I was pursuing a career in medicine and I wanted to have babies. I'd met a man who I loved and we got married, and there just came a point where I desperately wanted to have children. There was nothing could have stopped me. So I had to put my career on hold and have my children. And I had them fairly close together, and I tried to work part-time in between. And then I went back once they were old enough to go to school, and luckily I was affluent enough to have a bit of help to let me do it in that way. Now, if someone had said to me, yeah, okay, you can have 3 children, you get them started and we'll take them over until they're 5, as I suggested,
Mm-hmm.
You cannot do that.
No.
Because the other thing that we battle with as women is we don't just nurture the babies and give birth to them, is that when those babies are born, we are passionately in love with them. There is nothing for most women that would separate them from their children, ever. You can see it all over the world. You can see the anguish when this is happening. And you know that. So you have to battle with that as well. And I found that my battle was not just physically having the babies and bringing them up, but it was breaking myself away from the motherhood thing, the wanting to love them and wanting to be there for them, however old they were. I wanted to be there. But on the other hand, I was battling with the guilt that the state, in my case, had spent an enormous amount of money on my education, training me as a doctor, giving me every opportunity, and wasn't I wasting it by having children?
That's the thing that the female actually goes through, the dilemma.
You can't get away from it. What I'm
Of
trying to
course.
say is that we have to just accept that.
Mm-hmm.
We have to say that's the way it is. Now, how are we going to manage it? Now, there are some women who just want to concentrate on their families, let their husbands, if they've got one, provide for them, and that's absolutely fine. And I've got friends who've done that. There's a couple of people in my own family who've done it. They're very, very happy, they're very fulfilled. As their children have grown up, they've done all sorts of things, voluntary work, which has led to work, but they've had a very fulfilled life, a very intellectual life, and they don't regret anything, and their children have all been happy, and so have their families. There are other, I think mostly women like me, who've been doing this juggling act all through their lives. You know, in my case, it was politics as well. Was it politics, which I felt passionately about? Was it medicine, which so much had been invested in me to do medicine? Or was it my family that I would die for? You know, these three things, three balls being juggled the whole of the time. And that's what I've had to do. Now, how the state can help this situation is by doing something about childcare, and I think that is actually the one thing that we've been very bad at this country, in this country. The Labour government did get onto it by getting a lot more nursery provision than there was in my day anyway, but we need much, much more.
But then you did say that, like, when you first give birth to a child, you cannot let go because that motherhood instinct just
well,
you know,
in
plays
that
a big
case,
role.
there could also be provision for women to take their babies to work.
That'd be amazing.
I mean, well, of course it would be amazing, but I can remember once one of my assistants in Parliament who'd had a baby, and she needed to be at the meeting with me, and she brought the baby with her. And I just thought, that's ideal, just bring baby, it's all right, we can hand her around, you know, if she cries, we'll be all right, we can get on with the meeting. But the men, they couldn't contemplate this. How can you possibly concentrate if you've got a baby? And I'd say, well, if you're a woman, you can concentrate on anything, whether you've got a baby or not. I could feed my babies and read an article or write an article at the same time. You know, women are famous for multitasking.
Yeah.
That's one advantage we've got, is that women can do several things at once quite easily. And I think it is creeping in. There are more workplace creches anyway. There's one in Parliament now where people can leave their babies. If MPs, there are some MPs who've had babies and the children, and they can pop in and out and see them if they're actually up at Westminster. So it's gradually happening, but not nearly as much as in Europe. I mean, in France, which I know pretty well because I have friends there, there's very, very good childcare from babyhood, if you want it. It's not compulsory, but you are encouraged to use it and go with the baby, so that feeling that nobody can look after your baby except you gradually broken down a bit, you know, so you feel a bit easier about leaving them.
But then what we see in France is something I believe we also need in the UK, because there are many females, and the thing is, we do need a lot of females in the work sector, because, you know, it's not only for her to actually go out and you know, develop herself even more, but as a female myself, like, it's better, you know, like, also health-wise, because you're not just at home with your baby, even though you would, you know, you love your baby to bits, but still, like, you need to go out, you need to, you know, develop yourself at the same time. So to have your child there with you at work, that would even encourage you more to develop a family, at the same time develop yourself in the work sector. So it's a bit surprising that it hasn't...
Well, I mean, nobody questions, do they? Out in some African countries, out in the villages I've been to, the mothers have their babies with them the whole of the time, and they're working. They're working in the fields, or they're working in the villages, or they're doing all sorts of work with the babies. They're actually on their backs, or with them, or playing down there. You know, so it is possible, but it needs a lot of political will. And to get that political will, it needs more and more women, especially women who have married and had children, to get into politics. One of the problems with politics nowadays, I think, is too many people go into it as a career, and so that they don't have any experience before they go in of any other sort of life. and they don't understand quite what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
We need more women to actually get into politics. We need more women to get into all branches of British life, so that people become used to them and be used to the fact that they've got children. But we also have to cater for those women who cannot afford, because their jobs are probably poorly paid, or they're students. They cannot afford the heavy, heavy cost of a lot of childcare, or having someone in to look after the child when you're not there. So we've got to consider that as a nation. Excuse me. And that is really part of our social services. It's something we should be doing, because what you've touched on is, it is so important to have women in the workforce. The World Bank has shown statistically that when you look at an undeveloped country, the one thing that improves the economy and the richness and the workforce in that country is to release the women to be able to take part. The only way you can get the women to take part in the economy of a country is to give them good maternal health care and family planning facilities. So that, for instance, they don't go on having 8, 10, 12 children, and they're just used as a vehicle for having babies, and they can't do anything about it. If they can stop at 2 or 3 children, they can then see that those children are well educated, and they can go out to work themselves and help. The whole economy of the country improves. And it's one of the messages I'm sending out at the moment in the other work that I do on maternal health, is that if you look after your women, if you give them the ability to take control of their own bodies and the number of children they have, your country will get richer, and you will get richer.
It's not just that, though.
It seems an obvious, but they've never accepted it before. They've always thought it came afterwards.
No.
You have to be a rich country before the women can have fewer babies. It's the other way around.
But the thing is, like, because especially recently in the UK, many women have put their careers first before families and before, settling down and everything. And when I mean settling down, not just, just being a housewife, but, having children at the same time, juggling work. But then it's actually delayed a lot of women from actually having children. Like before, it used to be in like the mid-20s that women would actually start a family. But now it's become like, 40s. That's the thing. And it's really not, other than it not being really healthy for the woman herself, but it's not really good for the economy as well. And for Britain as a whole, because there are less people in the population.
And we're spending huge amounts of money helping those women to get pregnant quite often, because by the time they're in their late 30s and early 40s, they have great difficulty in getting pregnant. That is one of the dilemmas we women ourselves have to solve. And I've said before, we have, fortunately, unfortunately, the ability to make and nurture babies. That is our prime responsibility. We've got all the equipment for it. And we have got the same brains as men. I don't mean the same, but they are equally intelligent, equally able to do any sort of work or any sort of intellectual activity. That is our problem.
But then
it's a big problem. And the state, yes, can help to a certain extent, but it can't dictate to women what they do with their lives. They've got to decide for themselves.
Of course they can't dictate, but then when we have, for example, if a female was to go to an interview, one of the questions is if she's married or not, and that's
no,
just...
it's not allowed anymore.
That's not allowed anymore?
No, it's not allowed. If you are asked that at an interview, you can protest and say it's nothing to do with you.
That's something good then, as that's changed.
No. Employment law, there are very, very fixed... My goodness, I'd be handed out. It's been for years and years and years. You cannot ask questions about people's personal lives.
But then there are still statistics that men are more likely to get the job than women.
Yes, because there's an inbuilt, most people on the interview panel will be men, and there's an inbuilt thing. I can remember someone in my family saying to me, well, of course, the trouble is if you give a really good woman who's a really good candidate the job, 9 months later she might be off on maternity leave having a baby, so you've got a double problem. And I used to say, why is that a double problem? It means you can try somebody else in that time, and you've got a reserve bank of good people to help while she's on maternity leave. Come on, guys. And that's one of the good things that's happened recently, is that paternity leave is being given as well, so that men can also take leave. So if a woman's job is so important, she cannot leave it. She can leave dad at home just after she's had the baby to look after the baby, and she can carry on working, or they can do it, you know, week by week. So things are changing. And I think the government is very sympathetic and very aware that they need to do this, and women need to be helped. There are financial constraints on the government in all fields at the moment to actually give very, very cheap and affordable health care. And there are also some restraints from some religious communities, you know, and some cultural attitudes that women should be
more at home with their kids.
More at home with their families, and controlled by the men.
Controlled by them, and none of us would agree with, especially, you know, living in the West and having that feminist mentality. But then when we're to look at it health-wise, is it healthy for a female, like after giving birth, straight away to go into work? Shouldn't she at least rest, other than her not being able to leave her child? But that's something.
Not for a long time.
No, not a long time. But how long would you suggest, for example?
Until she feels ready, till she stopped crying. You know, you always get the weeps after you have a baby.
Yeah.
You tend to, and I mean, there is a sort of hormone upheaval after you've had the baby, and establishing breastfeeding too. And I think women need quite a few weeks. I mean, in my day, it was 6 weeks and then you were back.
Oh, okay.
6 weeks. Now, I didn't actually find that long enough. I found that very difficult to get a baby sorted out into any sort of... You don't even know your baby after 6 weeks. You know, they're still all over the place. One of mine in particular thought that, you know, he should be attached to my front most of the day and night, otherwise he screamed. You know, the others were all right, but one of them was like that. So, you know, you don't know. You've got to get to know your baby.
They
so
always have a
differs
different
with each
pattern.
woman. They all have different patterns, and you've got to allow for that. But I think they do now with maternity leave. I mean, most of my daughters-in-law and the women in my family, they have a year maternity leave, don't they, now?
That's really good.
Yes. That's not on full pay, but they can go back to their job after a year as if nothing has happened.
No, not just speaking
My
about...
niece, for example, has done that twice. She's had 2 children very, very successfully, and she's now back in full-time work.
That's really good. But then when thinking about it, sometimes because every position of work differs to the other. Some, if you left it for a year and then go back to it, it will be fine because you wouldn't have missed out much. But some of them know, like, you need to be at work the whole time.
You've just got to adapt to circumstances. But, you know, I say that you can't blame society or men for the fact that women have this dual function.
Of course you can't. It wasn't really in their hands.
I don't think the men blame us, although they do sort of assume, don't they, that we're, you know, they're women after all. We're just, you know, not quite like the men who are really superior beings. And you have to humour that. I don't think it's any good attacking them.
No, we humour it.
Humour it a bit. But we can't, what I'm saying is that however feminist we are, we can't get away from the fact that we have that dilemma.
And
we will always have that dilemma.
And this is when Anne Frank actually did say, like, one of the biggest feminists, that women are actually takers of shit because, excuse my language, because, like, females would have the work, have their, you know, studies and their careers, and at the same time they would have the home, at the same time they would have a family. So it's not just one responsibility, which before females started protesting and wanting equal rights, that was just the family. But now it's become 3 roles that we actually have, and to juggle them, it's actually harder than anything else.
And it's very difficult, and I think it's not just us juggling them, it's men getting used to the idea as well. I mean, I'm very fond of evolution. You know, I'm always mentioning evolution. And if you look back to, I mean, literally Stone Age time, the job, the function of the male of the species, as we were just becoming human beings, and we've become human beings, but their function was to hunt animals, kill them, feed their family from time to time, and to find some sort of shelter. The woman's role was to stay in that shelter, prepare the food, and have babies.
So that was the only role?
Until they died. And then the men would get another one and do the same with another woman. Now, I have just done, in my group in Parliament, a big report called Childhood Lost, which is to do with childhood marriage. And there are still many countries of the world where, for the sake of convenience and to get them off people's hands, children are married very, very young. Maybe against the law of the country. Many countries now ban child marriage, ban marriage before the age of 18. In this country it's 16 with parental consent. But in other countries it's up to 18 where it's banned. But it still goes on. It's still going on. And all over the world we had examples of little children, 11, 12-year-olds, being married to a 60-year-old, what looked like a monster man, who was, you know, was running out of wives, and he just wanted another one. Awful. There was one case we came across of a 12-year-old girl who was married to a very much older man and was so brutally treated during sex on her wedding night that she bled to death and did not survive.
That's very worrying.
That is only one story, but you know, that was just one that was told to us. And there are still parts of the world where girls are just seen as commodities to have babies and to look pretty. And that's it. And so there are lots of places in the world where we've got a long, long way to go to get even as far as we have. When my mother got married, my grandmother told her the best way to prevent having too many children was to let your husband have you as much as he wanted. That would reduce the strength of his seed, she said. And so, you know, so my mother, who was much more sensible and had read books and knew about things, of course, knew exactly what she had to do so that she didn't have more than 3 children. But when she got married, she had to give up her teaching career because she was a married woman. And at that time, married women did not work in the professions. How about that?
So things have developed.
That was in the 1920s.
But then things have developed.
So things have developed, of course they have. I mean, we wouldn't dream. Nothing has stopped me in my career except having babies, and I have welcomed that and loved it. In fact, it's almost an excuse to have a break. Nothing has stopped me having a lot of very enjoyable and I hope productive, even controversial years in politics. And I've got my family and I've got my grandchildren. I have a lot of grandchildren. So it is possible. And I assure you, I don't come from a very, very rich family. My parents were school teachers and my mother had to give up when she got married. She did go back later as things changed. After the Second World War, of course, she went back because there weren't any men. And that's the only good thing that ever comes out of war, I think. Is that the women, people take notice of the women because they're so useful, of course.
Yeah, no, women of course are useful, but then when we look at how it's become, in the sense that women have become more active in the work sphere, and it's actually very important because we've all developed and we've all become understanding of one another. It's not where it's, you know, the patriarchal mentality where, you know, the man rules everything and it's all about the man and he's superior and that's it. No. We know that both are equal, but of course the female and the male are equal in their own way. Like, you know, just the female.
Have you ever read Animal Farm?
No.
It was a book, a horrendous book, that told of a sort of dictatorial process on the farm. And the animals, each animal took took control and the head dictator animal, his favourite saying was, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others.
But that is the situation we have today.
That's the situation we have today.
Yeah.
Men and women are equal, but men are more equal than women.
They are. And
but that's what I say, you cannot get away from the fact that what we need to concentrate on is equality of opportunity. And that means never discriminating against a woman because she's a woman at an interview, or that she might have babies in the future. That, frankly, is her problem. No one ever asks a man what he's going to do with the children.
that's the thing.
No,
like,
no
even
one ever says to a man, well, what if you want to get married? What if you want to have children? When I went for my first junior hospital doctor job, they asked me what I was going to do between the interview and doing the job. And I very foolishly said, oh, actually, I'm getting married. And I learnt later from a friendly boss, later on, I didn't get that job, that was the killer line that I'd said. He said, why did you say that? And I said, because it was true, I was getting married. And he said, yes, but that in their brain, and this man I'm talking about was a feminist, that in their brain means no good employing her, she's just going to leave medicine, she's just going to get married and have babies.
But then that,
Cross off the list.
even though we would love to
That was
hope,
in the 1960s.
but that still happens today, even though we would like to think that, men have become more open-minded and women, have become more open in the sense that they can and they want to, continue working and have a family at the same time. Even though it's very difficult for the female to actually go through that, it's also difficult for her when she goes to interviews and whatnot, because she also has to consider that as well. Like, if she's in a really important thing during her work and there's something really important, she would postpone having, a child or having or getting married, because that's a really huge step in her life. At the same time, she wouldn't want to, ruin or put a hold or a pause on her work because of, all these years she's developed to come to that stage. So she wouldn't stop it. So it is really difficult when we think about it. And the thing is,
it is difficult, but we've got to be confident within ourselves and be more assertive, and don't be angry and don't be bolshy. I think some feminists, are too harsh and they try to be like men. What you've got to say is actually challenge those assumptions. I mean, if you don't get a job and you look at the candidates that were shortlisted and you know perfectly well that you were the best qualified and the best candidate for that job, you have to be totally honest with yourself. If you think that, you go back, it is your right in employment law to go back to those people and say, will you tell me exactly why I didn't get that job? Why did you not appoint me?
yeah.
Whether they asked you any questions about your personal life or not, ask them. Now that is your right in employment law, to have a breakdown of what happened at the interview and where you went wrong and why they appointed lowly Mr. So-and-so who you thought wasn't much good instead of you. You can do that. And I don't think a lot of women realise that, and I don't think we use it, not in an aggressive way, but in a totally rational, pleasant, reasonable way. Hey, that's strange. Why did you say that? Don't be angry. Don't be bolshy.
I think if females were to understand what went wrong in the interview, they wouldn't just develop themselves in the next interview,
Yes.
but they would have a more understanding of what is needed of them.
Yes, exactly.
Which would be really good.
Yes.
But then
But it is written into employment law, all of these things, but I think people just don't use it enough.
But then would the employer actually use, because they know if they were to say, oh, because you're a female, for example, they can actually get sued for it. So do you think they would actually give the full truth of why they didn't actually appoint you?
Well, they'd have to give some pretty good reasons, because if it wasn't that, there wouldn't be any reason, would there?
But then if they just were like, oh, this one person's more qualified.
Equal, well, they might just cook up some reason, or they may just not have liked you as a person very much. I mean, that happens at interviews as well.
Yeah.
It's happened to me once. I remember once interviewing, there was a whole group of people, and there was one absolutely super confident young man, who'd got all the sort of qualities. And the other people on the panel thought he was a really good candidate. And I thought, he's a stuck-up prig, you know. He's very good at interviews, but we have no idea what he's like. He's awful.
Yeah.
And I remember in the second round of interviews, I think I was quite rude to him, and I said, you know, you are young, you are male, you are well-dressed, you are English, you are well-educated, you are one of the lords of creation, aren't you?
Yeah.
Is that how you see yourself? And I can remember him sort of burbling some answer. But I thought, you know, he was so obnoxious. And yet the men saw that as confidence and positive.
Yeah, because he
And I
had that
thought-
charisma, I can imagine. You're not too happy about it.
No, I'm not too happy about that. Not too happy about that. I like a gentler approach, whether it's men or women.
But you know, with paternity leave, how come like men are not actually, you know, questioned with that or asked about that? Because, you know, just like the female, they're also getting leave for their child, which I believe both of them do deserve, because, you know, both parents do need to focus on their child. But then, like, men still today, they get more jobs than females. Their pay is higher than females.
Yeah, but the paternity leave has only just come in recent years. Give it a chance. The men have got used to it, and they are getting used to it. You know, things are changing. Don't you notice around the streets lone men pushing pushchairs?
Yeah.
Don't you see it?
Yeah, we do.
Now, in my generation, that wouldn't have happened. My husband never took the children out on his own without me. He'd come out with me, but he wouldn't take them off and leave me at home on my own. The young men in my family, the next generation, all take that as given. Of course they do. You know, they share the childcare. Things are changing. Now, I don't know in your particular community, in your particular family setup, whether you have reached that point yet. You know, I know lots of English families who haven't reached that point yet, but we are getting there. Gradually, it is happening.
No, like with our community, like many men are becoming more involved.
Yeah.
But there is still that group that would just be like, if a man would be pushing a pushchair, for example, or would be helping his wife with the child.
Yeah.
There are like a few people
what,
that
of
would be
course,
like,
mainly in the
what are
older
you doing?
generation
You
would
know,
say,
your
"Oh,
wife.
It's not very manly to do
your-
that."
Yeah.
What I think is so helpful, I don't like celebrity and pop stars and film stars. You know, it's a culture that grabs people nowadays, doesn't it? But to see those male stars, you know, with their baby, and they're doing it a lot, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's not just that the girl celebrities are being proud of being pregnant and showing off, but the men are doing it as well. And I think, you know, that will follow. Football, there was some match, was it a rugby match I watched at the weekend, and at the end, one of the players went and grabbed his baby.
Oh, that's really cute.
And brought his baby on like this onto the pitch to enjoy the celebrations. Now that wouldn't have happened. That wouldn't have happened when my husband and his friends were playing rugby. You know, they wouldn't have done that. What? You know, we wouldn't
Where's
even
this
have
baby
gone,
coming
"Oh,
from?"
Baby, what's the baby come from? But they actually went and got the baby and the little children and brought them in. So, you know, it's very difficult for us when we want change to be faster, but you have to accept that, you know, it is happening. Things are hugely different in my culture, very, very different from when I was a young woman and from when my mother was a young woman. It's all changing. Some of it I find very difficult to accept, actually. I mean, for example, dare I talk about it, I think the sexual freedom that people assume and the way some women dress when they go out in the evenings, I mean, I just feel so old-fashioned saying this, but I think, do you have to show so much bare flesh? You know, it's the end of November. I saw a few girls at the weekend on the Underground, and really, they could have been on the beach, really. They haven't got much more on. And I suppose I might have been terribly old-fashioned, but I don't even find it. Do men find that attractive? I suppose they find it sexy, but would they want their own girl to look like that?
That's the thing. That's the thing we always question, because there is a group of feminists that actually believe that, you know, women that dress in that sense where they're more perceived as an object rather than a female, than a human being. They're actually against that. You know, there is that type of perspective, but at the same time, some females believe that, you know, they have the beauty and they want to show it. But personally, I don't really agree with it, because
it's a difficult one, isn't it? I think it is a difficult one, because I know in Muslim families, I mean, you wouldn't dream in a million years of dressing like that. And I always actually quite envy the way you all dress, because I think, oh, wouldn't it be easy in the morning just to put on a long dress and a hijab and out you go. Instead, you know, I was late this morning. It's because, you know, I hadn't decided what I was going to wear, and you know, I could have just put on my lovely, very elegant long black dress and a hijab, and I would have been here.
Thank you.
But I don't do it, because that's not my culture, and people think I'd gone crazy if I did. But I do, and I know that there are some young women who just laugh at me and say, oh, don't be so old-fashioned, don't be so ridiculous. We have a right to be like this. And men do not have a right to rape us or grope us if we look like this. And I think, no, they don't have a right, but you are very tempting to them. You must turn them on to see you looking like that.
It's not just that, like, in the Islamic faith, we wear the hijab not only because we don't want to be perceived as objects, but because, you know, a human mind, you know, would look at a person, would judge an individual before actually understanding them. So we dress this way so they can understand us before, you know, looking at our beauty or anything else.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I cynically would think, oh, you know, I'd like to do it because I haven't washed my hands.
That isn't the case. We still have to.
But does that extend to the niqab? I mean, do you think? You see, I don't think you can get to know a person unless you can see their face.
In the Islamic religion, like looking at the Islamic religion, even with the, you know, one of the pillars of Islam, which is Hajj, you're not allowed to cover your face. Like, that's a big rule out there. And
really?
to go to
Hajj, on the Hajj, you can't cover your face.
You're not allowed. Oh. This is shared in all of, you know, the sects of Islam. However, culturally, like even before, there are certain dresses that some Muslim people would wear. For example, the abaya, which is like the one on the head. This is cultural stuff, and even like what I'm wearing now, I can still wear a different type of hijab. It doesn't have to be specifically this.
No.
You know, it's all cultural. And
but these women who go around with the niqab and the long black cloak, you know, they're just a sort of black cone, really, with their eyes coming through. And in Afghanistan, I hope it's dying out, but these women who even their eyes are behind a grill, you know.
This is all cultural.
That is subjugation of women.
This is all cultural. Like, even if we look at Iraq, for example, back in the day, this was like before Saddam's time or anything, people would wear that type of dress because that's what they dress. Even the Christians used to wear that because that was the cultural dress.
Everyone
before.
Covered up. Women covered up completely. If they
covered up, Even if like they would be wearing, like even the Muslims would be wearing a dress where their legs are out, their arms are out, which in Islam isn't allowed, but that's their culture. This is where the culture comes in. But they would still have that type of, you know, cloth that would be from their head, you know, to the ground, and that's what they used to wear. If they were a Muslim or not a Muslim, that's their cultural dress. And this is where the whole culture comes in and plays a big role with the whole covering the face as well. Because
and do you think it's dying out?
To a certain extent, because some people
I don't
believe...
think the hijab is, and I think that's good. I don't mind that. I think it's lovely, and I think a lot of people, a lot more young women I see wearing it now, they're not wearing it for religious reasons. They're just making a statement. You know, they want to be seen, I'm a Muslim.
Yeah.
You know, take me or leave me. And I don't mind that. But I do hope, I must say, it's the other extreme for me. I deplore the girls who are half naked on the underground on Saturday night. And, you know, I just think it's awful. They look awful. But I also think that the niqab looks awful, and women who are completely veiled, it's just terrible.
This is where, like, individuals, they kind of like decide it themselves. Because I once had a conversation myself with people that wanted to start wearing the niqab, and they genuinely believed that that would actually make their connection with God stronger. And even though, like, I gave them lots of, statements of how, it's not really within our religion doesn't actually recommend it, or it hasn't even stated it. But then they genuinely believe that this is something that's going to make them closer to God. So, I just left them because that's their personal opinion. But then in every culture, in every country, you would have different type of dresses and stuff. Like,
well, you would. I mean, the nuns in this country, in the religious orders of nuns used to be totally covered up. I don't think any of them got so far as covering their face, but they certainly covered everything else. I mean, they had they don't now. Modern day nuns have got much more modern dress, but they certainly, in times gone, when I was a little girl, there were nuns going around with big long flowing robes and head coverings. So it's the same for all religions, but it's just I think that Saudi women, it's a culture in Saudi, isn't it?
In Saudi,
Saudi
like when I went to Saudi myself, I felt a bit weird not wearing one, because they're not really used to seeing people, people's females' faces. So when you have to walk, the stares you get, it's just like, oh my God. I felt like, oh my God, I have to cover my face. This is really weird. So sometimes it's the culture you're in. Even like in London, for example, because there are many different cultural dresses,
everywhere. We've got everything here.
We really do. So it's
that's what's great about London.
You've got the one that's covered from head to toe. At the same time, you've got the one that literally, as you said, is.
I haven't seen anyone with a grill though, like the Afghans. I've never seen that in London. I've never seen that.
It's really down to the culture and the place you live in, and what's really accepted and recommended from you. Like if we look back at, believe it was in the 50s or 60s, it's more the Victorian time really, with the really long dresses and,
it made it impossible for women to do anything really. They were just ornaments.
But not just that, like if a female at that time was to, show a lot of her skin, she'll be frowned upon.
Oh yes, terribly. My mother would have done. Well, I've got a remnant of it. I don't like, yes, it's okay in my family and to my partner, but not, not out in the street.
Not in public.
I'm very shy about going on the beach. I hate putting a swimsuit on.
Thank you very much for joining us, Jennifer. And thank you very much for watching Beneath the Surface. See you next time.